The image you're looking at is what I refer to as mechanical woman. She represents, to my mind, what is wrong with each of us. I claim that we have no hope if we do not change how we think. Welcome to episode 5, Understanding Ourselves. Let's begin this episode with a question. How many of you think that in our current divided society, with its surging number of mass killings of totally innocent school children and mall shoppers, is pleasing to God? I pray all of you answer no. Then I ask, who do we blame for this dark madness? The Republicans? The NRA? The rise in hate? The rise in racism? The Black Lives Matter movement? The rise in mental illness? And, referring back to episodes 3 and 4, do we blame the rise in neoliberalism, or do we blame the power of curriculum? Without question, all of the above clearly contribute to a growing sense that I hear from many people in social media that we are living in the end times. And to my mind, that is very hard to refute. But let's put that correct but negative thinking to the back of our minds for now. Can any one of you good folks honestly say that this spike in violence in our great country is just temporary, and that it will soon somehow just stop? Well, don't shoot the messenger, but I say just listen to the news any day, and you can bet your booty violence somewhere in our great country will be part of the news of that day. No, it ain't about to stop no time soon. Okay, let's get real now. With all this violence and end times talk, just how does the general claim we can make our great country more pleasing to God with a new urban education? To answer that, I am making the possibly over-dramatic statement that, to my mind, only by using what I refer to as a Noah's Ark approach to a new urban education can we hope to overcome the very powerful negative social forces of neoliberalism and curriculum, and most of all, ourselves. Yes, you heard me right, overcoming ourselves. Simply put, the general claims that we need to fix ourselves for hope of a better future for us all. But first, what do I mean by a Noah's Ark approach? And then, after that, what on earth do we need to fix ourselves for? What in heaven's name is wrong with us? To start, it will take a new generation to begin to change the mess we're in. I call my vision of a new urban education a Noah's Ark approach because I firmly believe that we need to start completely anew, as in a new pre-K, ages 2 to 4, let's say. As I will detail later in later episodes, we will grow from there one grade at a time, where students and parents are being developed via a new curriculum to see life, themselves, each other, and nature in a very different light. A light that reflects the more accurate and modern understanding of reality. That will make more sense as we proceed. Our pre-K will begin and operate with a totally new idea I call the IFP, or the Individual Family Plan. It is something I can't wait to introduce in episode 8, our final episode. We will see that it is the critical new factor in a new and revitalized urban education. But for now, to the crux of this episode, and the more difficult question to answer is, what is wrong with us that we need to fix? To show just how deep this question of what is wrong with us is, I begin with a quote from a great English philosopher named William James, author of the incredible book, The Variety of Religious Experiences, who tells us, the bare essence of all religions and faiths boils down to this. There is something wrong with us as we stand naturally. Wow, that sounds pretty troubling. What could he mean? Well, to start, let's take another look at the recent spike in violence and hate that's eating away at our great country like a cancer. If we think that those specific individuals who actually commit these incredible acts of violence are very different and not like us at all, and that they, not us, are the sole cause of this violent madness, we would be making a very grave mistake, in my opinion. Don't kid yourself. They are human beings just like us. So I repeat, who or what do we blame for this violent state we live in? The answer is that the blame lies in each and every one of us. That sounds disheartening if true, but how so? But before I answer that, to add salt to the wound, consider the fact that if this rate of increase in violence we see today continues on indefinitely, no education at all will matter. And I would be better off just trying to increase my own net worth and drop the effort to change the future of our urban kids. Think I'm kidding? Just imagine mass shootings of school children, let's say once a month. We will, in my opinion, have devolved into an uncivilized society with consequences I'd rather not even discuss. I'm dead serious. We are heading in that direction. Again, just listen to the news any day. To get to the bottom of this question of who or what to blame for our divided and violent society, I am afraid I have no choice but to introduce you good folks to our third new fancy schmancy word. As many of you already suspect, this will not be an easy thing for me to explain, but I must try my best anyway. I pray the Lord helps me here, because I'm certainly going to need it. Okay, our third fancy new word is epistemology. Repeat after me. Epistemology. Well, sure sounds fancy enough, doesn't it? But what on earth does it mean? And what does it have to do with a new future for urban education in our violent and divided society? To keep this as simple as possible, for our purposes, we are defining our new fancy word epistemology as one of the two sciences that explains the way our universe, nature, and ourselves are built up from the tiny units we call atoms. Hang with me now. We will see that it explains how we actually see and understand ourselves in terms of technology. Okay, let's give it a shot. This episode will focus on the science that explains our current epistemology, while episode 6 will introduce a radical new epistemology that I brazenly but confidently claim is more aligned with the Word of God, and hence represents a better future for us all. But this episode and the next will focus on the image you see now. I am using it to explain the two different epistemologies that have the power to guide our social thinking and subsequent behavior that I am about to explain. Our new word, epistemology again, is visualized here in this image by the brilliant Harvard physicist Dana Zohar from her incredibly forward-thinking book titled The Quantum Society: Mind, Physics, and a new social vision. Her significant knowledge will be used here to simplify and break down our two different epistemologies to show how each relates to how we understand life and ourselves. It is, of course, a tremendous oversimplification meant for non-physicists like me and my best guess, many of you. Let's read what she says carefully as she indicates what is going on in this image. The top of this image reads, "When Newtonian atoms meet, they clash and go their separate ways." The bottom reads, "When quantum systems meet, their wave aspects overlap and they combine to become a new system." The top is our current and the bottom our future epistemologies. My task now is to break each one down and hopefully show how this image represents two entirely different ways we see ourselves, each other, and nature. Please hang with me as best you can on this. The top half of this image represents what is famously called Newtonian classical physics, or mechanical science. For our purposes, we will call it our current epistemology. Well, what's the deal here? Historically, the ancient Greek philosopher Democritus, along with Aristotle, once famously said, "It is utterly silly to think that two or more things could ever become one." If you look at the top half of this image, they would appear to be right. But that was many, many centuries ago. Here's the critical point. It was the very beginning of the idea in Western thought that people are totally independent and isolated from each other and nature. Anyone beginning to see the dense problem developing here? Making matters much worse, since the early 1800s, a man named John Dalton took that ancient idea of atoms a bit further and said that these tiny atoms act very much like billiard balls, hard, round, and when they come into contact with each other, they repel and go in often different and opposing directions. The social equivalent of these clashing billiard balls would be whites versus blacks, Democrats versus Republicans. We know very well that all too often, these groups repel each other and go in very opposing directions because they historically yet mistakenly see themselves as separate and different, when in truth, as we will soon see, we are all connected with each other and nature. Okay, even if that's true, so what? Most everything we understand today, including ourselves, is based on this outdated mechanical way of understanding the world, the way the world is built. It has become how we see and define ourselves. For example, we hear people all the time say things like, "I need more input from you," or "You turn me off with that talk." How about these? "Your output needs work." "I feel like I need to reboot so I can start all over." Or, "I was turned on by her ideas." She should process that information faster. Admit it, all these mechanical technology words like input, output, turn on, faster, etc. make perfect sense to describe how we humans act and behave. In addition to how we talk and understand each other in purely mechanical terms, listen to these 10 quotes from highly reputable folks also talking about the impact of this mechanical epistemology on our very lives. 1. has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. Albert Einstein. The human spirit must prevail over technology. Again, Albert Einstein. Humanity is acquiring all the right technology for all the wrong reasons. Buckminster Fuller. Technological progress has merely provided us with more efficient means for going backwards. Aldous Huxley. The great myth of our times is that technology is communication. I love that one. Libby Larson. You folks are going to laugh at this one. TV and the internet are good because they keep stupid people from spending too much time out in public. Douglas Copeland. Ethics change with technology. Lord, that's true. Larry Niven. The ultimate promise of technology is to make us master of a world that we command by the push of a button. Volker Grassmuck. The real danger is not that computers will begin to think like men, but that men will begin to think like computers. Sidney Harris. And once a new technology rolls over you, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road. Stuart Brand. And finally, technology presumes there's just one right way to do things, and there never is. Robert Pirsig. What are all these very reputable folks trying to tell us about this mechanical epistemology we so much believe in? They're telling us that even though we are not machines, we understand and see ourselves purely in machine-like and mechanical terms. In addition, I say they are first and foremost warning us that we are heading in the wrong direction and that the cost of that will be tremendous. Notice how the H.G. Wells prediction that we are in a race between education and catastrophe seems to fit quite nicely with these quotes. So where does this all leave us? And what point am I trying to make? All these well-stated issues with our mechanistic society will be our doom, even if this insane violence somehow miraculously stops. Sound like a reach? Check this out. Who will doubt that many highly influential people treat the resources of nature, like coal and gas, as if they belong to us, only to be used to create short-term profits until there are no more resources left on Earth? In short, if left to their own desires, the Earth's resources will be used up completely to create their profits until our planet is devastated. To my mind, this is a form of greed and madness that is very displeasing to God. Okay, let's begin to wind down. Look at the top of this image one final time. We can see it creates a simple visualization of collision, separateness, individualism, and confrontation. Sound familiar? As a matter of fact, the word atomism itself actually means separateness and independence, as in human beings being separate from each other and nature. For our purposes, we really need not go any further than that. As humans, for centuries, we've mimicked this inaccurate and out-of-date understanding of reality, which is why confrontation and division rule our society. I know this is hard to understand, but please trust me. This is why we have such a violent and divided society. And most of all, we are all to blame. But before we move on to episode 5, a few final words on the top half of our image. Please pay close attention to this super critical point. When the balls clash, there are only two options, either this way or that way. In other words, the social interpretation of our mechanistic understanding of the universe leaves no middle room for gray areas of complexity. You are either straight or gay, either black or white, either rich or poor, either Democrat or Republican, either violent or peaceful, etc., etc., etc. I think you get the picture. This is the gigantic social impact of an inaccurate and out-of-date understanding of how the world is built. In short, our current mechanical epistemology represents an either-or way of understanding. Sadly, we actually think through this misunderstanding. And since thinking precedes action, how we act and how we see each other is also inadequate and out of date with reality. To sum up this difficult idea of either or that I boldly claim is core to how we see ourselves and each other, I ask that you take another look at Dana Zohar's image and ask yourself the simple question. Is it hard to imagine which half represents confrontation and disagreement and which half represents compromise and harmony? And dare I say, love. You got 1 second to figure that one out. Yes, it is no coincidence that our billiard ball model, which we swore by for centuries, has the look of our very troubled times. That is confrontation and collision, where compromise is seen as some form of retreat on principles to the issues at hand, and thus something that will not be done. Think I'm kidding? This stuff is deadly real and global in scope. And this is a global phenomenon taken from the New York Times on November 11, 2019, concerning the escalating violence in Hong Kong. And they say, but neither side seems to agree on what the future should look like under Chinese rule, and neither seems willing to compromise. Say what you will, but in my view, this best also explains the dangerous paralysis in our either Democrat or Republican democracy. In simplest terms, in my view, our mechanical epistemology is what generates the my way or the highway thinking. Lord knows we are bathed in it each day. People, it will lead to our doom. This ain't no joke, folks. Yes, our mechanical view of life will be our doom unless we begin to see reality differently. Finally, to my mind, this mechanical way of thinking runs so deep in us that it is nearly impossible for us to think differently without some form of communication with God Himself. Yikes! What do I mean by that? Classical physics, or our mechanical understanding, allows us to do many simple things in life. It will provide answers to basic questions like, how much does that box weigh? How fast is that car going? How long will it take me to fly back home to New York? How much change should I expect from the $20 I handed the cashier at the grocery? How much is 12 divided by 4? Or 3 3/4 minus 2 1/4? How many days before my next birthday? How does a raise of 12% increase my salary? Can I afford a vacation this year? And so on and so on. I'm sure many of you good folks are asking, come on, General, get real. What on earth is wrong with being able to answer those questions using our mechanical understanding, specifically math? They are obviously things we need to know. That, I say you are correct. And for that, our current epistemology serves us well. But that is only half of the story concerning this epistemology. Let's call it the good half, albeit the weaker half of the story. In truth, I have been heavily criticized by people who quickly and with little to no thinking assume that I am advocating eliminating teaching mathematics in schools altogether for some ungodly reason. That would be just plain stupidity, and the truth makes me angry, although understandably so, because this stuff I am unveiling is difficult to grasp for many. I mean, for crying out loud, common sense asks, where will we be without math? We need math for the many everyday things we do. What the hell then is the problem? To answer that, let's go to the other half of the story of this epistemology so I can tell you what the hell the problem is. Once we get past all the everyday things we need in our mechanical understanding for, there are no tools left in our epistemology for us to figure out the far more important things that mathematics and common sense are unable to help us with. But then again, that will be discussed in the next episode where we introduce our new epistemology. Before we end this episode, let's complete what I see as wrong with our current epistemology to answer your question directly of what the hell is the problem. The biggest problem with our current mechanical epistemology, as I see it, lies in the ability of mathematics to be used primarily as a tool of social and economic exclusion. This is the bad or the larger half of the story about our current epistemology. I will not bore you good folks with a very long history of how mathematics is used to direct some deadly serious social ills, like the profitability of slavery, less pay for work done by women, redlining entire areas to discriminate in housing to people of color, to completely control the actual number of people still unemployed, to bypass natural supply and demand function in our capitalistic economy to control prices, etc., etc., etc. But by far the biggest thing wrong with our current epistemology or mechanical science is that there is no room for God. For God cannot be understood mechanically. He cannot be calculated. He cannot be increased. He cannot be decreased. He cannot be divided. He cannot be multiplied, etc., etc. In short, mathematics and classical physics cannot process the very idea of God. So referring back to the image of our mechanical woman, all the gears in her head will be of no use to her if and when she decides to seek God about serious issues in her life, something most of us have done from time to time, if not daily. I think you folks may like this. Now, since mathematics, like most things, comes from God, there are ways to use it to show the power of love that we can never see or appreciate in our current mechanical epistemology. This is taken from Matthew 18, chapter 12 and 13, NIV. It's the parable of the lost sheep. Follow this one. I love this. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. Oh, I love that scripture. But this is crazy math for us humans. How so? Using our mechanical way of thinking, 99% of almost anything is always considered far more than just satisfactory. I ask how many of you would not be satisfied with nearly 99% of anything? Wanting more than 99% is often considered as pure greed or some form of neurosis. This is an example of what I mean when I say there's no room for God in our current epistemology. All those gears in her mind cannot calculate the wondrous feeling of love experienced by Jesus and transmitted to us via scriptures when he found that one missing sheep. Her mechanical understanding will never allow her to understand why 99% of mostly anything can ever be considered unsatisfactory. I can see the gears in her head grinding to a complete halt and trying to figure that out. Yes, I repeat, we're heading towards catastrophe if we remain thinking that we are isolated, separate beings that are not connected to either each other or to nature, and there's no doubt that if we do not find an alternative way of seeing the world, there is, in my view, absolutely no hope for us to survive. But there is hope. Let's wind this down, and thank you for hanging with me. This episode introduced our third fancy schmancy term, epistemology. It was used here to define one of the two sciences that explains how we see ourselves, each other, and nature in general. Here, we focus on the first of the two, or what we termed mechanical science, which assumes that atoms are very much like billiard balls that collide with each other and go their separate ways. The social implications of this view are staggering. It assumes people are separate from each other and nature, that there's no way for two separate things to ever become one. Try explaining that to your loved ones. Folks, I promised from the very beginning that this is a doctoral level podcast, but that you will not need a college degree to join in and understand. Believe me, this is incredibly important to me. After considering the wisdom of trying to explain this difficult stuff, at least in my mind, I decided to include it after all, at least on a very high level. It is what allows me to claim that the things we see in science, like these billiard balls colliding I've been talking about, can explain our social behavior like blacks colliding with whites and Democrats colliding with Republicans. In other words, what gives me the right to say our current mechanical epistemology is the root cause of our deeper social troubles. I believe I found a simple enough story for this to make good sense to all you kind folks. Please follow this. This is taken from a book called The Conservation of Energy from Professor Balfour Stewart of Owens College in Manchester back in 1873. I think you guys are going to like this. In this little mini story, for lack of a better term, he compares basic physics to human behavior that I think you may enjoy and appreciate. Let's keep our billiard balls in mind. This mini story is called The Advantage of Position. And I quote, "It is in fact the fate of all kinds of energy of positions to be ultimately converted into energy of motion. Energy of position is like money in a bank. The energy of motion is like spending it on anything we wish." To see this more clearly, let us consider the case of a watermill driven by the rushing water of a dam compared to a windmill driven by the wind. In the first case, we can drive the mill anytime to produce energy anytime it's convenient for us by just releasing the rushing water. In the second case, We must wait until the wind happens to blow. The first case has all the independence of a rich man. The second, all the submissiveness of a poor man. Does this make sense to you? What is the professor telling us? There's a very strong connection between science and human behavior. We conclude that our current epistemology of mechanical science is useful only on those things we need to know to get by in our day-to-day lives, which of course is critical for us. But, and this is a huge but, it provides no clues on how to improve ourselves and our society to prevent us from destroying ourselves. You think climate change is nonsense? Episode 5 will bring us wondrous new insights via a new epistemology. Yes, it will be difficult, but I can't wait to explain it. There's even some humor in it. Until episode 6, blessings to all of my friends and even maybe some foes I have out there.